The wooden doors of courtroom 3B creaked open at exactly 8:57 a.m., and all heads turned instinctively, not out of respect, but out of curiosity, skepticism, or worse. A tall black woman in her early 30s walked in without haste, her white blouse neatly tucked into black slacks, her curly hair tied back in a low bun. No designer bag, no shiny heels, no makeup. Just a mother who had dropped off her son at school and walked into court carrying nothing but a worn leather portfolio. Judge Morton Clay, perched behind the elevated bench with his silver-framed glasses low on his nose, glanced up dispassionately. He saw her. He noted the lack of polish. He leaned subtly to his right, whispering something to the court officer, without taking his eyes off the woman. Janelle Rhodes had seen that look 1,000 times. On landlords, at the DMV, at parent-teacher conferences. She knew what it meant before a word was spoken. "You're not supposed to be here." But she didn't flinch. She walked with purpose, her black flats making almost no sound against the polished courtroom floor, and took her place at the defense table as if she'd done it 100 times. In the gallery sat DeMarcus Lane, her client and neighbor. He watched her nervously, wringing his hands in his lap. His oversized jacket hung loosely over his shoulders, his expression caught between hope and disbelief. He hadn't expected her to show. But Janelle always showed up, even if the system never had for her. Across the aisle, at the prosecution table, Assistant District Attorney Joel Banks barely glanced up. Mid-40s, stiff tie, too much cologne. He flipped through his file, smirked slightly when he saw the defense bench occupied by someone he didn't recognize, then leaned back in his chair like this was already over. Then came the sound of boots. Officer Brent Callahan entered through the side door, clipboard in hand, gun at his hip. He wore mirrored sunglasses indoors, which he didn't remove until he reached the witness stand. His uniform was spotless, his presence loud. He scanned the room and snorted softly when he saw Janelle. "She your new intern?" he whispered to Joel, nodding toward her. Joel didn't answer. Judge Clay banged his gavel once, just enough to silence the whispers. "Court is now in session. We'll begin with the matter of People versus Lane." Janelle stood, calm and composed. Her name was not yet familiar in that courtroom, but her presence commanded more than they expected. She handed the clerk her notice of appearance with a steady hand. "Your counsel?" the clerk asked under her breath, unable to hide the surprise. Janelle nodded once. "Janelle Rhodes, appointed counsel for the defense." The bailiff did a double take, glanced at the judge, then accepted the paper. No welcome, no acknowledgement, just awkward silence. As Janelle returned to her seat, Brent Callahan leaned back in the witness box, arms crossed, a smirk slowly forming across his face. "This is going to be fun," he mouthed silently to the gallery. Janelle opened her portfolio, flipped to the tab marked Cross Lane Case, and adjusted her seating. She had spent the last week preparing line by line. No high-tech laptop, no paralegal behind her. Just her mind, her research, and a pencil with half an eraser. She didn't look like much, and that was exactly how she liked it. Because they were going to listen, not because of the suit she wore or the letters after her name, but because truth didn't need permission to speak. And it was about to have its turn. Janelle had barely settled into her seat when the first flicker of discomfort rippled through the courtroom. The silence that followed her arrival wasn't respectful. It was suspicious. As she reached into her leather portfolio, the courtroom security officer, a stocky man in a navy uniform with a tight jawline, stepped forward with visible hesitation. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said in a tone both firm and dismissive. "This area is for legal representatives only. You'll need to wait outside until counsel is present." Janelle looked up, calmly meeting his gaze. "I am counsel," she said, holding up her official badge and appearance notice without fanfare. "Janelle Rhodes, defense." The officer didn't take the paper right away. He stared a second too long. Then, as if unwilling to be wrong, he took the form and glanced at it, lips pressing into a flat line. "Just needed to verify," he muttered before stepping away without apology. Janelle said nothing. She knew better than to expect acknowledgement. At the prosecution table, Joel Banks looked up from his neatly organized files. His brow furrowed for a split second as he scanned her plain white blouse, her portfolio without so much as a firm latch, the absence of any paralegal or assistant. He stood and walked over casually, arms crossed. I'm sorry, he said, not sounding sorry at all. Are you here with records? We usually file support documents before session starts. Janelle kept her eyes on him, her tone even. I'm the appointed defense attorney for Mr. Lane. Joel blinked. Oh, of course, my mistake, he said, brushing it off quickly. Just look like. He stopped himself. Whatever he had assumed, it didn't need saying. But the implication hung in the air, uninvited and unmistakable. From the witness stand, Officer Brent Callahan caught the exchange and didn't even try to hide his amusement. His voice broke the room like a snap of fingers. You're the lawyer? He asked aloud, grinning. Thought you were the court babysitter. A few quiet snickers escaped from the gallery benches. One of the younger court reporters, seated with a tablet in hand, covered her mouth too slowly to hide her smirk. A man in the back, clearly another officer off duty, leaned toward his colleague and murmured something that drew a muffled laugh. Janelle's fingers tightened slightly on the edge of her table. Not enough to reveal tension, just enough to ground herself. Officer Callahan chuckled again, shaking his head as he leaned back in the witness chair. I've seen interns with more edge, he added, clearly intending to provoke. Judge Clay didn't intervene. He was adjusting his robe, flipping through pretrial motions, either unaware or unwilling to disrupt the show. Perhaps, Janelle thought, he preferred to let people underestimate her. It made the fall more theatrical. Janelle remained seated, composed. She opened her binder to the first tab, ignoring the heat creeping up the back of her neck. She'd been through worse, at housing offices, at job interviews, in hospital waiting rooms where people assumed she was the help instead of the mother. This courtroom wasn't new ground, it was just a brighter stage. Behind her, DeMarcus Lane shifted nervously in his chair. He'd heard every word. And though his public defender didn't look like the lawyers on television, he was already beginning to realize she didn't need to. At the prosecution table, Joel Banks cleared his throat, attempting to reassert control over the room's attention. Your Honor, if we're ready, the state is prepared to proceed. Judge Clay nodded without looking up. Very well. Let's begin. Callahan turned smugly toward the judge, but not before giving Janelle one last glance. One that said he still didn't believe she belonged in the room, let alone at the defense table. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Janelle didn't need to raise her voice, or flash credentials, or outdress expectations. She came armed with facts, with evidence, with the truth, and she'd been underestimated enough times to know how to weaponize that silence. But for now she stayed quiet, because the louder they laughed, the harder they'd fall. The room was still humming with soft laughter when Janelle stood. She didn't clear her throat, didn't raise her voice, didn't acknowledge the lingering smirks. Instead, she simply looked to the judge. Your Honor, she said evenly, the defense is ready to begin cross-examination. Judge Clay barely glanced up from his docket. Proceed. Janelle turned to the witness stand, her binder still open to a tab labeled Callahan, audio-visual. She stepped forward at a measured pace, voice calm and deliberate. Officer Callahan, she began, how long have you been with the department? He grinned, resting an elbow on the rail. 23 years. I know these streets better than I know my own kitchen. Impressive, she replied with a nod. Then, I imagine you're also familiar with departmental procedure for conducting traffic stops. Of course, he said quickly. It's second nature. And on the day in question, April 12th, you initiated a stop on Mr. DeMarcus Lane at approximately 3:42 p.m.? Correct. You noted in your report that the vehicle failed to fully stop at a posted sign? That's right. She paced slowly, adjusting the clicker in her hand. And you were parked on the northeast corner of Glenmore and Ridgeview when you observed the violation? Correct again. Thank you. She tapped the remote. On the screen behind her, the courtroom's main monitor flickered to life. Let's take a look at the footage from your body cam at timestamp 15:23:09. A still image appeared, grainy but clear. Callahan's patrol car faced a busy intersection. Two SUVs, one a dark gray Suburban and the other a delivery van, were clearly blocking the line of sight to the stop sign. Can you confirm, Janelle said, gesturing to the screen, that this image was recorded from your position at the time of the alleged violation? He squinted. Yeah, that's from my dash. And would you say this vehicle here, she circled the van, was obstructing your view of the stop sign? It was near it, sure. Obstructing, she pressed, her voice cool. He leaned back. I could still tell what was happening. Could you see Mr. Lane's wheels come to a complete stop? I don't need to see wheels to know when someone's rolling through a stop. So your determination wasn't based on visual confirmation? I made a judgment call. She nodded. Let's continue. She tapped again. The video rolled. The body cam caught Callahan approaching the driver's side, leaning toward the window. You stated in your report, Janelle said, eyes on her notes, that the driver appeared jittery and that you suspected intoxication. Is that correct? Yes. Did you perform a field sobriety test? No. Did you request a drug screening? No. Did you conduct any form of physical examination to determine impairment? He hesitated for a second. Didn't need to. I've been doing this long enough to know when someone's high. So your conclusion was based entirely on behavior you interpreted without any testing? I have instincts. She let that hang for a moment before stepping forward. Officer Callahan, instincts are not listed under the official traffic stop procedure manual, are they? He opened his mouth but paused. Well, not exactly. She turned to the judge. Permission to enter Plano PD Protocol Section 4.6 on traffic stop procedure into evidence? Judge Clay nodded. Granted. Janelle held up the manual. Section 4.6.2 reads, officers must perform a field assessment when impairment is suspected. Decisions based solely on subjective perception must be corroborated by observable, documentable behavior or testing. Were you aware of this clause? Callahan shifted. I've read it. Did you follow it? A pause. No, I didn't think it was necessary. Thank you. She moved on. Now, let's talk about the search. You wrote in your report that you observed a suspicious object beneath the passenger seat. Correct. Did you use a flashlight to confirm what the object was? No. Did you ask the driver for consent before searching? No. Did you have a warrant? No. She walked closer, her voice steady. Then under what grounds did you initiate the search? He shrugged. It's protocol. I had reason to believe there could be contraband. But you just admitted you didn't know what the object was, so you searched based on a shadow? He looked to the prosecutor for support. Joel Banks didn't meet his eye. Callahan crossed his arms. I made a judgment call. Janelle raised an eyebrow. Another one? A brief rustle passed through the gallery. No further questions, for now, she said, returning to her table. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. But for the first time, the smirks in the courtroom had vanished. Officer Brent Callahan sat straighter in his chair, the cocky grin beginning to slip from his face. And Janelle Rhodes, mother, outsider, underestimated public defender, was just getting started. The room was no longer laughing. Janelle sat quietly at the defense table, flipping through a series of carefully marked pages in her binder. The silence was thick, weighted with a growing unease. Officer Callahan shifted in the witness stand, arms still crossed, but his posture was no longer relaxed. His knee tapped the wood beneath him, betraying a flicker of nerves. Janelle stood again, calm as ever. Binder opened to a new tab labeled Comparative Incidents. She walked back to the podium, voice level, eyes trained on the officer. Officer Callahan, she began, you confirmed earlier that you did not administer a field sobriety test, perform a drug screening, or observe any contraband in clear view prior to the search, correct? He nodded once. That's correct. Thank you. She flipped to the next page. According to the Plano Police Department Standard Operating Procedures Manual, revised January last year, Section 5.3.7 explicitly states, all traffic stops resulting in vehicle search must be justified by articulable facts observed by the officer, corroborated by protocol-based actions including inquiry, observation, and consent. Were you aware of that? He hesitated. Yes, I was aware. And you still proceeded with the search based solely on your personal feeling that the driver appeared jittery? Yes. She turned slightly to address the courtroom, then continued without looking back. Now let's review your prior incident reports. Over the past 30 months, Officer Callahan, you filed 15 citations involving male drivers under the age of 40 in the 3rd Ward District. He frowned. So? In 9 of those cases, she said, lifting a stack of printed pages, your language was nearly identical. Phrases like fit the type, twitchy behavior, nervous, and acting like he had something to hide appear repeatedly. often in cases where no illegal activity was confirmed, no charges were filed, and no contraband was found. She stepped closer. "Are you aware of this pattern in your own reports?" "I don't write the same thing every time," he said defensively. "People act the same way when they're hiding something. That's experience." Janelle flipped to the last page. One of those cases involved a college student heading home from his campus job. Another, a father picking up his son from daycare. None of them had prior offenses. All of them were black. She let that settle before asking her final question, her voice soft but resonant. "Did you ask my client where he was coming from?" Callahan didn't answer. "Did you ask where he was going?" Silence. "Did you ask what he does for a living?" Still nothing. Janelle took a single step forward. "Officer Callahan, did you know that DeMarcus Lane is a certified elementary school teacher? That he teaches third-grade math and science at Highland Oaks Academy and volunteers on weekends to run a literacy program for at-risk youth?" Callahan blinked, his mouth parting slightly, but no words followed. The entire courtroom stilled. Even Judge Clay leaned forward, his pen paused midair. No rustling, no whispers. Just the quiet weight of revelation, falling like a gavel no one needed to raise. Janelle straightened her papers and looked out over the gallery. "You didn't ask, Officer Callahan," she said, still composed. "Because you didn't care. You saw a black man in a modest car wearing a hoodie, and you decided who he was." Her gaze swept to the jury. "You didn't need facts. You didn't want context. You had a narrative that fit your instinct, and you used your badge to make it real." She turned back toward the bench. "Your Honor," she said firmly, "this case isn't about a rolling stop or a suspicious shadow beneath a seat. This is about something older, deeper, and far more dangerous." Her words landed slowly, each one deliberate. "This is a textbook example of systemic bias. A law enforcement officer operating not on policy, not on evidence, but on assumption, repeated, unchecked, and unchallenged." She stepped back, "And today we challenge it." No one spoke. Even the prosecutor sat motionless, face blank, legal pad untouched since the cross-examination began. Janelle closed her binder gently and returned to her seat, never once breaking composure. She had spoken softly, but the truth had shaken the room. The silence that followed Janelle's final words was not empty, it was dense with realization. No one moved, no one shifted in their seats. Even Judge Clay, who had seemed distracted at the beginning of the hearing, was now leaning forward with both hands clasped together, his eyes fixed on the young attorney in front of him. Janelle remained seated, her hands folded neatly on the binder before her. She didn't fidget. She didn't look around for approval. She simply waited, composed, steady, unmoved by the sudden shift in atmosphere. The prosecutor, Joel Banks, stood slowly, but it was clear from the stiffness in his posture and the hesitation in his movements that he was not preparing to challenge what had just been said. He flipped through his notes, eyes scanning for some foothold, some contradiction to exploit, but the pages looked blank now, their contents drained of all weight. He finally set them down. "Your Honor," he said, voice thin, "the state has no further questions for the witness." Callahan let out a quiet breath, as if he had been holding it for far too long. His shoulders dropped just slightly, not in relief, but in resignation. He looked out at the gallery for the first time since he had taken the stand, and the sea of faces that met his gaze held none of the amused indulgence they'd had at the start. There were no smirks, only scrutiny. Judge Clay adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "Very well. Having reviewed the evidence presented, particularly the body camera footage, the conflicting report language, and the noted violations of procedural standards, it is the court's conclusion that the stop in question lacked proper legal justification." He looked toward DeMarcus Lane, then back to Janelle. "All charges against the defendant are hereby dismissed. The citation is voided. Mr. Lane is free to go." A murmur spread through the courtroom like the first stir of wind before a storm. DeMarcus, seated beside Janelle, let out a soft exhale, his eyes widening in disbelief. Janelle reached over and gave his hand a reassuring squeeze, her face calm as ever. No smile, no visible triumph, only a quiet certainty that this was the outcome the law had demanded all along. Callahan stood and left the witness stand without another word. He didn't look back. His boots struck the floor with awkward force, no longer the confident stride of someone used to owning the room. As he passed through the doors, a few whispers followed him, nothing loud, but sharp enough to sting. "Isn't that the guy from last year's stop and search scandal? Did you hear how she broke down his whole report line by line?" "Who is she?" Janelle gathered her papers with precise movements, no rush. Her binder closed with a soft click. She placed it in her tote bag, plain canvas, no branding, and adjusted her cuffs with practiced ease. She stood, smoothing the creases in her trousers, then turned to DeMarcus. "You're clear," she said softly. "I don't even know what to say," he whispered. You didn't stop." "You weren't supposed to be here in the first place," she replied. "I just held the mirror up." As they made their way toward the courtroom exit, the whispers intensified. One court reporter raised his phone to check the docket. "Rhodes," he muttered to a colleague. "Janelle Rhodes. She's not on the usual rotation." Another voice chimed in. "She's new, real new. But did you see that? She had every line from the manual. Every date." She dismantled that report without raising her voice. Outside the courtroom, in the hallway lined with old portraits and peeling government paint, a small cluster of interns from the district attorney's office huddled in quiet conversation. "She did that solo," one of them said. "No partner, no assistant, not even a laptop. She's a single mom, did you hear? Just passed the bar last year." "That can't be right," another said. "That kind of composure? That kind of preparation?" She was surgical. Janelle walked past them, focused on the door ahead, but she had heard every word, and still, she didn't look back. As Janelle stepped into the sunlight outside the courthouse, the buzz had already begun. Someone in the gallery had recorded the final minutes of her cross-examination and posted it online with the caption, "One mother, one warrior, one relentless attorney." Within hours, the clip had gained traction. Thousands of shares, then tens of thousands, then headlines. By evening, her phone lit up with notifications she never expected. Messages came pouring in, clients asking for help, strangers offering thanks, students expressing admiration. A community that had long felt invisible suddenly saw itself reflected in her calm, unwavering presence. One message stood out. It came as an envelope, hand-addressed, slipped into her office mailbox between case briefs and court summonses. Inside was a letter from a 12-year-old girl named Amaya in Dallas. The handwriting was crooked but determined. "Dear Miss Janelle, I saw your video. Everyone said you looked too young and too normal to be a lawyer. But you showed them. I want to be a lawyer too. Because of you. Love, Amaya." Janelle held the letter for a long time, her fingers tracing the folded edges. She didn't seek out cameras. She didn't post her own closing argument or give interviews outside the courthouse. She simply went home, set her bag on the kitchen table, checked on her son's homework, and made tea. Later that night, with the apartment quiet and dishes drying on the rack, she opened her worn notebook. The same one she had used since her first paralegal job. On the next empty page, she wrote, "Next case, not to win, but to make it right." No hashtags, no spotlight, just conviction. Outside her window, the streetlights glowed across the Houston skyline, and somewhere across the city, someone who once doubted was now watching the clip again, this time, listening. And for those who believe justice has a look, a voice, a pedigree, Janelle had offered something else entirely. Proof. If her story moved you, share it. Speak it. Let it remind us that courage doesn't always shout. It often walks in quietly, armed with truth, and leaves the door open for others to follow.